intro out without actually realizing that I wasn't live.
Yeah,
Clearly, you
and we're live.
clearly you guys in the audience wouldn't recognize it because I am actually not getting the notification. Um, if we are live, hello everybody. Welcome back once again. I'm still waiting for the notification in my inbox. Thanks you two for your great inboxes. But y'all can hear me, right?
Yeah,
I have had a bug, or I've made a crucial error where I was completely inaudible for the last two 2K weekly streams. There's the notification. Alright, we are live.
Alrighty.
Uh, but welcome back to another episode of 2K Weekly. I'm TaipeiJoey101 here with Danny V, and once again joining us is Dapigbear, a good friend of the show and occasional helper out with the 2K universe. Introduce yourself once again.
Hello, glad to be back.
Love the enthusiasm. We're going to get started with our top stories this week. We have a lot of championship clinches and a lot of stuff that's been pushed back to next week, which we'll get into. A lot of chaotic moments in the top 25. We lost a lot of the teams in the lower half. I do predict some of them will be back. The top 4 classic, if you remember last night in Fort Worth, a 3 overtime game between Boise and TCU. The number 2 Broncos ended up taking the win 59-51 with a game-clinching interception. Meanwhile, Arkansas gets their first win of the season on senior night as they take down East Carolina 42-20 to not only their first win this year, but their first conference win as well. Navy and Colgate go to 4 overtimes in a rush-heavy overtime game, with the Navy midshipmen taking the win 35-32. If you may have been paying attention IRL, there was a huge snowstorm all of the last end of the week that bleeded into 2KU as well. A lot of games got played in heavy snow. The biggest of them was the game between UConn and UMass, which we'll get to. And we are literally 6 days away from the biggest weekend in all of college football, rivalry weekend. This is not only crucial proving grounds for conference championship, but it's just a place to get your bragging rights that you can hold on to for the rest of the year. Danny, your thoughts?
yeah. And a lot of these games are really, really big. I mean, have a top 4 matchup this late in the season is always going to be great, and every weekend is always an important weekend for any team, no matter what your record is. So we got to see how everyone performs.
Pig Bear?
Yeah, it's some wise philosophers once said it's rivalry week. Just proving grounds for each of these teams, and again, let's say if you can win a rivalry game, you'll be at that school forever. You could lose the rest and win your rival, and that's all you'll be remembered.
Uh-huh. Let's move on here to our first 4 games of the week, but before that, once again, remember 2KU is on Tumblr. Also remember, we have a stream on the way. I kind of lost track of it due to me being sick for most of the week, but we have a basketball stream on the way where we go over the 2KU's basketball. Danny will hopefully join us, and maybe Pig Bear will as well. Don't forget to stay tuned on the channel for that. And by the way, the presentation is ready, you guys, whenever you guys are ready. But we'll move on to our games this week. First up, 3 overtimes in Orlando as Danny V's Knights continue their 8-game winning streak with a win over Rice. Over Rice. 45-42 the final. Old UCF getting the win, and now they have one last test in order to play for a conference championship appearance after the disastrous start to the year they had. As for Rice, it's not over for them yet. They're 5-6. Their big game is against Houston. They could play spoiler to the Cougars, and with their win and potentially a win for one of the teams we'll see below, completely flip the CUSA on its head. Danny?
Yeah, glad to see my Knights win. This could have been easy, a look-ahead spot, but now they have to look forward to next week as the CUSA East will be determined by the War Night 4.
Pig Bear?
Again, the Owls are just the closest team in all of football right now. They're so close. But again, you got a good one for the Knights of Central Florida.
I would argue the Knights are even closer. We'll move on. The Fargo Dome, one of the most hostile environments in all of college football. North Dakota State hosting a Wichita State who is looking to set up for what would be their first ever 10-win season. At least in the regular season. The Shockers, however, were the ones who ended up being shocked. 49-27, the final score from Fargo, as North Dakota State clinches the Missouri Valley West Division. With this win, they still have to play their big rivalry game later on in the year. I believe it's South Dakota State they still have to take on. As for Wichita State, they wrap up out of conference with Tulsa. Danny?
Yeah, for Wichita State, even though this might have been like a big bad taste in their mouth, it's still gonna at least be proud of this season, being 8-3, a huge improvement from last year, and yeah, we gotta see. And now they hope they could win against their big rival Tulsa.
Pig Bear?
Yeah, just good win for the boys.
We'll move on here. Annapolis, Maryland, home to the Navy Midshipmen. A very tough season for the Admirals. However, Navy's been turning it around as of late, and a big stepping stone here is the 4 overtime rush heavy win they got in the snow over Colgate. 35-32 the final score. Or the Colgate Raiders played a great game. However, they'll fall now to 2-9. I believe their last game against Holy Cross. Can someone check on that?
Colgate's last game is against Holy Cross.
Navy still has another game coming up before their big rivalry game against Army. Don't forget to stay tuned on that. Pig Bear, your thoughts here? Pig Bear?
Again, the Toothpaste Warriors just fall short here. And again, good win to the Midshipmen.
Danny?
Yeah, even though IRL, the Midshipmen really did hurt me, but glad to see them get this win in 2KU, and now they're one game away from going bowling, which is a big step up from earlier this season when they were winless.
11 a.m. is insane. How about we go to Liberty Stadium, now formerly the Liberty Bowl Stadium in Memphis, Tennessee. A ranked matchup between the Southern Miss Golden Eagles and the Memphis Tigers. Tigers 41-33, a final in what might be one of the best games that these two teams have ever played. The Memphis Tigers take the win and now have clinched, or are now a game away from clinching the Conference USA West Division. They just need a Houston loss to clinch it. Well, they need a win and a Houston loss. Southern Miss knocked into the rear view. They can still finish 10-2. They still have one more game on their schedule. Danny, can you fill out who that is?
That's against Arkansas.
They have Arkansas. Memphis has another game as well. I believe that's against UAB. And Houston's last game...
Memphis' last game is against Cincinnati.
And Houston's last game is against that Rice team we mentioned earlier. We'll all be watching that. If both Memphis and Houston lose... and Southern Miss wins, I think that still means Houston gets in.
That is correct.
But Pig Bear, your thoughts on this game? Pig Bear, your thoughts? Pig Bear? Danny, your thoughts?
Yeah, for Memphis, this was a really big win. I mean, both these teams they were really looking forward to playing against each other because this was going to be their divisional championship game. But now both these teams gotta hope that Rice pulls off the upset against Houston, and let's see if Houston can keep their momentum going forward, and let's see if Memphis can click their ticket.
Now, Pigbear? I don't think he's here. We'll move on now to Hartford, Connecticut, the big game between UMass and UConn. We've been looking forward to this for quite some time. Played in a huge downpour of snow, but still some offense was able to shine through. The UConn Huskies winning 34-27 in this game. Danny?
Yeah, this game was a great showdown for the Big East, and now we know who's going to be playing their Big East championship. It's going to be UConn against Temple.
One more time, Pigbear? All right, I think he's not here. We're going to move on here. Your number 21 Coastal Carolina rode into this game unbeaten, but ended up getting stunned by Georgia State, who's now 6-5 with the win over the Chanticleers. This does not actually affect the conference championship run, however, as the 38-31 win only bumps the Chants down to 10-1. They can still pick up a win next week. Who's their next opponent?
Yep, Georgia State plays against Georgia Southern.
Coastal.
And Coastal plays against Chattanooga.
Yeah, Coastal just needs a win over Chattanooga to wrap up 11-1. One of the best seasons the Sun Belt has seen in quite some time. Danny, your thoughts?
Yeah, for Coastal Carolina, this was a really big stunner. I mean, they were on their way to go undefeated, and for Georgia State, this is a way to continue fueling up, and let's hope this becomes a big rivalry game, because remember, both these teams came from the SoCon together into the Sun Belt, so we gotta really hope that these two teams begin to prosper more in this conference and make something a big rivalry.
Coastal Carolina with the loss. They would have been the first team to finish unbeaten in conference play in the Sun Belt in quite some time. I'm the last team to finish in the Sun Belt above 11 wins. You would have had to look to finish 11-1. Coastal is about to meet that mark. That would have been FAU a while back in 2012 when they ended up finishing 11-1. They won their conference championship game and ended up losing in the Orange Bowl. Coastal would have been the team to play would have been in the slot for a New Year's or a BCS Bowl, but the winner now would be Stephen F. Austin, as they can turn potentially into a 12-0 team with a win over rival Sam Houston, which we'll definitely cover next week. Let's move on to Bloomington, Indiana, the number 6 Illinois Fighting Illini heading to Hoosierville in Bloomington to take on Indiana. With a 48-45 victory, the Illini hand the Hoosiers their 5th loss. Indiana goes from a Rose Bowl bound team to now a 5-loss team in the blink of an eye. Danny?
Yeah, for Indiana, this was a really disappointing season, especially how this was senior night. You were projected to be one of the best teams in the conference, and here you are losing to Illinois. And for Illinois, you were the big shocker team of the Big Ten this year. And for you, Big Bear?
Yeah, this is shocking for the Illini, right? Or Illinois or Indiana. Kind of got mixed up there.
Mm-hmm. There you are. We were looking for you. Let's move on to...
Either way, it's an embarrassing.
Let's move on to Boulder. With a huge senior night upset, Colorado advances to 8-3. A 41-35 win over the Baylor Bears. Baylor knocked out of the top 10. Colorado pushes the Big 12 North race back one more week. Kansas, of course, lost to Missouri this week as well. Now, so that means next week is do or die. Colorado has a relatively easy game against Texas Tech, but their real test is not one of their own. They need Kansas to lose to Kansas State in order for the Buffs to slip in to the conference championship game. They will be in order to try and take down Oklahoma State. Danny?
Yeah, for Baylor, what a disappointing way to lose this game. I mean, you're number 8 in the country, still had BCS bowl hopes, and here you are losing to Colorado. And for Colorado, congrats on senior night. I mean, this is big, and it's a big thing for them.
Boulder is also spelled with a U, by the way, Danny. Pigbear?
Good job for the Buffaloes. Outstanding performance.
Another thing I will mention here, Baylor's last game, TCU. Look out. Let's move on now. I mentioned this in passing, but we head down to Memorial Stadium in Lawrence for the border war as Missouri once again takes down the rival Jayhawks. And for the first time in possibly decades, the Missouri Tigers were not favored in this game. So they get the upset win over Kansas, 31-20, the final score, as number 16 Kansas will definitely take a slide after that. And once again, it's down to their final game this year against their rival Kansas State in the Sunflower State Showdown. Danny?
Yeah, for Kansas, this was still a great season for them. I mean, going bowling by a significant amount, wow, that's such impressive for them, but it's still disappointing for them to lose against Missouri. And for Missouri, you're still trying to have yourself a good hopes for bowl games and stuff.
What is Missouri's last game this year?
Missouri's last game is against Iowa State.
All right. Pigbear?
I mean, just glad to see the Jayhawks had a pretty good season, and I think the Tigers had a pretty good season too. Well, both of them's obviously not over yet because they got one more game than bowl games.
Mm-hmm.
But again, just kind of spread the power throughout college football.
Mm-hmm. We'll move to Protective Stadium in Birmingham as the USF Bulls get a 47-24 win over UAB. They have surged to 6-1 in conference. They are 7-4 overall. The big win for the Bulls sets up a paramount matchup in the war on I-4 against rival UCF. A definite game will feature on next week's program. Danny?
Yeah, for UAB, you at least had some hopes for maybe conference championship games potential, but you are just being a little bit down. You have to win your next game to go bowling. For USF, still a great season for them, but we have to see how they perform next week against UCF, their toughest game yet, potentially.
Mm-hmm. It's not hard to see where you'll be leaning, Danny, but we'll move on to Athens, Georgia. A rivalry that doesn't really have a name, but Georgia will mark this date on their calendar for next year. The Georgia Bulldogs upset at home on senior night, 38-30, the final score, as they were just about to head out to Atlanta for what we thought was going to be a ranked matchup. But now, falling to a 4-loss year, the number 20 Bulldogs are surely out of the rankings once again. Danny?
Yeah, for Georgia, you're still kind of in the race for the SEC East title game, but now becomes heavily unlikely with this loss. And for Tennessee, still a good job on playing spoiler, though they still want to have hopes for a pretty good bowl game, to say the least.
Pigbear?
I guess you can say kind of the opposite of what happened in real life a few weeks ago and what happened this week in real life with Tennessee falling to the Shamecocks. But good job for the Volunteers for going to Athens. Athens is not an easy place to play. Believe me, I'm a Clemson fan. I've seen us fall in Athens many a time.
Mm-hmm.
But good job to the Vols.
Let's move on to Kelly Shorts in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, as the Eastern Michigan Eagles advance to a 9-2 season with the 45-38 win over rival Central to take home the Michigan Mac Trophy. Both teams are now 9-2, 6-1. Central was ranked. They'll probably be out by next week, though. A huge impact for Eastern Michigan, and now that makes the game against number 18 Northern Illinois do or die, because Central upset them last year. Eastern now needs a win and another Central. Eastern now needs a win and they're in. Northern loses, Central's in. No, wait. Northern wins, Central's in. I got it mixed up. However, it's still a three-horse race here in the MAC West. Danny?
Yeah, for Eastern Michigan, you really gotta hope that you could beat Northern Illinois at home next week. Because if you win, you're going to the MAC championship. If you lose, Central will go. So it's do or break for them. And for Central, you gotta beat Western, and you gotta hope Eastern loses.
Big Bear, thoughts? Big Bear?
Okay.
Big Bear.
I mean, in Maction, you never know how it's going to turn out in the end. I reckon that the Eastern Michigan's in the running, correct?
Yes.
Northern Illinois wins. Eastern goes, or Central
Eastern
goes.
and Northern play each other. Eastern wins their in. Central wins and Eastern loses their in. If both Eastern and Central lose, then Northern Illinois is in.
Okay. What happens if Northern Illinois and Central wins?
Then Central's in.
Okay, so Central needs to win, you're in. So Central controls their own destiny here.
Yeah.
Okay. Just making sure that was correct. All right. But yeah, I think the Huskies will end up getting in.
We'll move on here. Next up, number 13 Georgia Tech. After their loss to LSU, they're still at it. They have a game again. They had a must-win game against Alabama. Thankfully, they managed to get it through 34-20, the final score from Tuscaloosa. As now Alabama is hoping to cap off the season with a final win against hated rival Auburn. Auburn down in the Iron Bowl. Danny?
Yeah, for Georgia Tech, you need to beat Georgia next week to go to the SEC championship. And for Alabama, it's just the Iron Bowl. And therefore, they just got to go to the Iron Bowl and win whatever bowl game they go to.
Trying to get Bama to win the Iron Bowl doesn't seem like an impossible feat. Big Bear?
Again, Iron Bowl, it's really important, and again, but I mean, I was wrong in calling the Jackets would make it to the national championship a couple weeks back. But again, this is something I think Georgia Tech can build off with coming seasons.
It's not an impossible outcome.
And hell, is that game in Atlanta or Athens next week?
1 second.
It is in Atlanta.
Who knows? Maybe. Well, they're still in the running for the East, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so if they win, they're in, correct?
They win, they're in. Yep.
Yep. So yeah, it's basically the East Championship in Atlanta, maybe, kind of.
Sorry about that. I gotta accidentally called someone. We'll move on here to Oregon State and Cal. Now the 8-3 Beavers now surging at the end of the year. But they had a hard test in Berkeley. This game went to 3 overtimes, 118 combined points. The Beavers get the win, 60-58, the final score from Memorial Stadium. Danny?
Yeah, this was a good game. I mean, 3 overtime classic between these two teams, and Cal tried giving them the all. They had nothing to lose besides another game that lost column, but still a valiant effort for Oregon State. It was still a good job for them taking care of this pretty good Cal team.
And Pig Bear?
Yeah, good job on the Beavers for getting that victory.
Yeah, we'll move on. Portland State trying to remain in the running for an FCS playoff spot. They were brought in as a hopeful cushion for a winless Eastern Washington. However, it was the Vikings who flipped the script, taking down the Eagles 50-27 in sort of a revenge game for their time back in the Big Sky in the FCS, which with how poorly they've been performing, Eastern Washington may be likely to return to. Danny?
Yeah, for Eastern Washington, now you gotta be thinking, well, as of now, there's only one way to go, and that's up. And this is only just year one of them being in the FBS, so let's hope that they could do some improvements for next year.
Pig Bear?
Wow, Eastern Washington. I don't know if there's any room to go for them. I think they should just return to the FCS.
What's their point differential, Danny? You want to read that out for the audience?
Yeah, the point differential for Eastern Washington, it is negative 413.
One more time for those in the back.
Negative 413.
And one more time.
Negative 413.
What was their record in the FCS last year?
They were in the playoffs last year.
And they just got donkey whopped by Portland State.
And it gets worse for them. They are the worst team for offense and defense in the entire country in the FBS.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my.
Enough lingering on badness. Let's talk about two good teams down at Aloha Stadium in Honolulu.
Aloha.
Still waiting for that new stadium. However, Hawaii taking on Nevada. A must-win game in the conference race. However, it was Nevada who advances to 10-1 with a 35-25 win over the Rainbow Warriors. Hawaii wraps their season against Pacific next week. Meanwhile, Nevada has UNLV. Both teams desperately need wins in order to keep pace in there. Nevada can clinch with one more win, or they may have already clinched. Can you fill me in on that?
Nevada already clinched the division, so they're already locked all in.
Mm-hmm. Hawaii still is hoping to at least nab one more win on the way out. Danny, thoughts on this game?
Yeah, for Nevada, it was a great way to end off their season. I mean, or end off this before end off their regular season whack play, because next week they're playing against UNLV. And now they're just wanting to go to San Antonio for the WAC championship.
Pig Bear?
I mean, just good for Nevada to get a good dub out there and enjoy some island paradise before we return to. Well, Reno's up by Lake Tahoe, so I guess it's a little cold this time of year. So yeah, good win and some good weather.
We will move on here, though. Let's take a look at the games this year. Currently, as we look at Wednesday, starting off. Sorry, I have to. That's something I had to take care of. Marshall getting a win 45-20 over Western Michigan. Miami, Ohio, losing on the road to Ohio. I believe that clinches the MAC East. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Almost. Marshall, they're still in the race kind of a bit. If Marshall beats Ohio, Marshall goes to the championship. So
that's the last
it all
game of the
depends
year,
on this week.
So we still have that race going on. 27-20, Buffalo gets handed a loss at the hands of Ball State. Meanwhile, Akron putting 62 on the Youngstown State Penguins.
Waddle.
We'll move on to Thursday. In a close game out in the desert, UTEP 30-28 the final. the final coming up just short as Texas State picks up another big win this year. Meanwhile, William & Mary puts a thrashing on Washington and Lee to continue their improbable season. James Madison is going bowling for the first time in school history thanks to a 40-31 win over Jacksonville State. And North Texas gets a win over Western Kentucky. We'll wrap up with the Friday games. We mentioned Rice and UCF. North Carolina winning their victory bell over Duke. We already mentioned the Wichita North Dakota State matchup. How about Louisville? After the rough season they've had, they're going bowling with the 27-0 win over Cincinnati to take home the keg of nails. And UNLV getting an upset win over BYU on Friday. Danny, thoughts on the weekday games? Any big ones?
Yeah, I mean, besides, of course, the big overtime shootout between UCF and Rice, I mean, I think a big game I would like to mention is Akron against Youngstown. I mean, 62-6. That is one hell of a score, and at least it gives them a little bit of some hope for next year, maybe.
Pigbear?
I like to say, and again, kind of alluding to in real life, Mormons versus Mullets. I guess we get Mormons versus Sinners in BYU and LV.
It's the Saint City versus Sin City, you could say.
Yeah.
I think that's a big game as well. UNLV, I believe they've clinched a bowl. Correct me if I'm wrong.
They're at 5 wins.
They can clinch next week, but they have Nevada in their path. I'll have to see if they're able to play spoiler. Let's take a look at Saturday. We'll go one column at a time. I'm Nebraska getting a 31-20 win over Oklahoma in what was once called one of the greatest rivalries of all time. Still a great one, however. How about 37-34 Farmageddon in overtime? Kansas State snatching the win in Ames over Iowa State. Michigan beating Northwestern handily in order to try and keep pace in their division. Temple, who's locked in the Big East South, they get another win for the road against Pitt. Pitt's now in do-or-die situation next week against rival West Virginia in the backyard brawl. 48-40, the FAU Owls get the win on the road over Troy. And in a matchup between two new schools this year, St. John's gets the 27-17 win over Rhode Island. I'll also mention Oklahoma State completely putting a shellacking on Texas A&M, 62-20. That's actually it. Danny, your thoughts on the first column? Ooh, I know a game that would stick out to you. I didn't mention this yet, but 34-31, Wisconsin winning the Heartland Trophy over Iowa. Your thoughts? Danny?
For me, I would really like to. Proud for Wisconsin. This season it started off as a disaster, but now they're one game away from going bowling. So let's see if Wisconsin can get that one big game next week.
Of course, it's against their rival Minnesota. Pigbear, your thoughts on this first column?
Again, that was a pretty good game between Wisconsin and Iowa for the Harlan Trophy, not Florida Rosedale. Sorry, get all those Big Ten rivalries mixed up.
Thoughts on South Carolina putting 50 on Kentucky?
Personally, I hate that, but I guess good for the Gamecocks.
You get an 8-win South Carolina next week, so good luck for your Tigers. We'll move on to the second column here. Michigan State putting 44 on Purdue. 44 on Purdue. West Virginia winning 33-13 over Cuse. Virginia Tech getting a big win on the road over the Clemson Tigers. How about Miami putting 50 on Florida, who's having a disastrous season of their own? Houston 47-27, the win over SMU. That makes it do or die next week against Rice. Sam Houston winning 41-31 over Hardin-Simmons. They got some nods in the top 25. Where they placed, we'll mention later. In overtime, Nichols beating Northwestern State to try and keep their lead. Boston College finally picking up a good conference win over Villanova 45-26. Rutgers winning 51-38 over UNC Charlotte. In overtime, Mississippi State picking up their first conference win of the year over Vanderbilt. LSU winning 41-16 over Auburn, and Maryland winning over the Virginia Cavaliers. Your thoughts on the middle column, Danny? Danny, your thoughts on the middle column?
Yeah, for me, apologies, my Wi-Fi died, but for me, I really liked Mississippi State against Vanderbilt. I mean, an overtime classic, and these two teams getting their, I believe it was their first wins in conferences each. So, good job on these teams.
When your team has nothing, you got nothing to lose. Pigbear, your thoughts on the middle column?
Again, just the Hurricanes laying that shellacking down on the
Gators.
Gators.
I don't know if you...
And a good victory for the Terps in their traditional rivalry that should be played every year in real life with Virginia.
Mm-hmm. We'll move on to the third and final column. Dave's Show winning the Gnome 35-28 over Florida State. I feel like that would have been a game we should have talked about in that last slide. We'll move on though to Minnesota going to overtime but falling to the Buckeyes 34-27 the final. In that one, App State getting the win over Georgia Southern 23-16 the final there. The game we featured last night on 2KU Saturdays is, please watch the recording if you haven't already, an all-time classic, 59-51 in 3 overtimes. The Broncos got the win to remain unbeaten. How about New Mexico State winning their classic rivalry against New Mexico 45-24? Air Force slipping one past Colorado State 37-34. They need to win against Utah State next week in order to go bowling. Penn State gets the 28-24 upset win on the road over Notre Dame. Stephen F. Austin remains unbeaten with a 30-13 win over UT Arlington. And Idaho putting up a very nice score on Tulsa 69-24 the final there. That wraps up that column. Danny, your thoughts?
Yeah, for me, I mean, that 2KU stream was potentially the best game we ever streamed. A game I would really like to mention is Penn State Notre Dame, because Notre Dame needed to win this game to go to the Big Ten championship, but now here they are falling to Penn State, and now they can't do anything unless both Michigan State and Michigan lose their games.
And Pigbear?
A lesson I learned this year from football: never count Notre Dame out in the whole Big Ten championship. But I mean, we can kind of count them out. But again, nice score from the Vandals. Again, that was just one game that I'm kind of sad I missed, the TCU Boise State game.
The VOD is still up on the channel if anyone wants to check it out. Don't forget to watch them. They're more fun live, but you can still put them on, I'd say. Let's move on now to the final set of games. We mentioned Cal and Oregon State. USC winning 44-31 in the battle for LA. Wyoming getting a 34-20 win on the road over Utah State. Oregon winning 41-36 over the ASU Sun Devils. San Jose State trying to keep pace for a bowl berth with a win over Cullen Payton. UTSA welcoming and upsetting the Long Beach State. We'll call them the Beach for now. As the runners win 28-16. Washington State hosts the Cardinal and get blown out in the process. San Diego State does the blowing out on Montana 62-28 the final there. Washington remains a 3-loss team with a 51-27 road win over Arizona. And that wraps up that column. Danny, you want to point anything out?
The Battle of LA was definitely a good game to watch. I mean, it's always good to see these two teams play against each other, and the uniforms, they always look great. Both teams wearing their home uniforms, no matter where this game is being played.
UCLA USC? I didn't know that. Pigbear?
I guess we got some paction. P-A-T-I-O-N. So paction. But great games of Oregon State, Cal, Arizona, Oregon, USC, Washington. But yeah, just a good overall showing for the conference.
Mm-hmm. Definitely don't write them off. We'll move on now. The race to the conference championship, a lot slimmer at this point. I believe now Virginia Tech and UNC have clinched it. Now that's all that's decided is who's the home team.
Not fully yet.
Who else is still in it?
Florida State and Maryland, because if North Carolina loses, Florida State actually jumps them and takes their spot.
Florida State.
And if Virginia Tech loses, Maryland will be the team to jump them by tiebreak.
That is right. Yeah. They're still in it. I thought we were going to mention South Carolina. Big East is decided. UConn will be playing Temple in East Rutherford. But don't write off your last game. You always want to play 100% each game. The Big Ten Legends is still wide open. Michigan State is looking on the outside. Hoping to slip by the Michigan, who still sits at the top. The game is going to be the big decider there. Ohio State holds the power in that division. If Ohio State beats Michigan and Michigan State gets the win over Penn State, the Spartans jump and they move on to the conference championship game in Indianapolis. In the Big 12, Oklahoma State clinched their division. I think officially they clinch it with Baylor's loss because they won this week. Meanwhile, the Big 12 North still up for grabs. Colorado sitting on top, but they need Kansas to lose to Kansas State in order to clinch. The Conference USA East, it's the war on I-4 that will decide it. On a UCF and USF, who's going to Birmingham and who's going home. Meanwhile, the Conference USA West is a 2-horse race as well, but it's a lot less clear-cut. Houston holds the head-to-head. However, Memphis can slip in with a win and a Houston loss next week to Rice. We'll take a quick glimpse at the Independence Army is sitting at 8-3. They have 2 more games against Georgetown and Navy. Navy can get eligible with another win as well. Dave's show is 7-4. They can finish 8-4 with a win next week, of course, over I believe rival Miami, if I'm correct.
Yep.
The Ivy League has its champion, that being Columbia. They are 9-2 with a 5-1 conference record. Great showing for the Lions to be the first team to clinch a conference championship. Meanwhile, the MAC East still the MAC East, much like the Conference USA East, is down to 1 game. If Ohio beats Marshall, they're in. If Marshall beats Ohio, they'll be the first team ever to make it to a conference championship game at 6-6. Could you imagine that? That's utterly insane. The MAC West is a 3-horse race between Eastern, Central, and Northern Illinois. Eastern Michigan plays NIU. The winner of that game needs to wait for the result in Central. Eastern won't, however. If Eastern wins, they're in automatically, thanks to the head-to-head to Central. Also, if Central loses, they will be in automatically as well. Let's move on. We'll move on to the Missouri Valley, which has been clinched on both sides. Northern Iowa at 8-3 takes the East. North Dakota State currently 7-4 takes the West. They can slip to 8-4 with a win over rival South Dakota State. In the Mountain West, 100% clinched at this point. Boise State with the win over TCU is going to Denver. Wyoming also potentially could be a 10-win team entering that game if they manage to slip a win next week over rival Colorado State. As for the Pac-10, it's clinched. And the USC Trojans will be playing a rematch against the Stanford Cardinal, as both teams are one loss entering the final week. USC has Notre Dame. Their conference schedule is already finished. Stanford has Cal next week, as they play the 40th version of the big game after the infamous band is on the field play. Which, by the way, did you know the 40th anniversary of that game was on Friday?
Really?
Yeah. We'll move on to the SEC East, which is still technically up for grabs. Georgia can win it with a win over Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech just needs to win and they're in. The West has been clinched. However, the LSU Tigers are going to Atlanta. We'll move on to the SoCon, which was unclinched. Georgia Southern falling to 5-2 after their loss to Appalachian State. And that means Western Carolina is now in the lead in the division. Georgia Southern can clinch again with a win this. Actually, their conference schedule is done. I believe they play Georgia State next week. They just need App State to beat Western in order to re-clinch their spot. I believe they're not 6-5 also. We move on to the Southland East, which is currently in the possession of Nichols. Southeast Louisiana is second. Again, who are their last games, Danny?
For which teams?
Nichols and Southeastern Louisiana.
For Nichols, they both play against each other.
We have another deciding game down in the Southland. A win would be huge for either Nichols or Sela. We'll have to see how that goes. Both divisions are still up for grabs next week, because Stephen F. Austin plays Sam Houston, and Nichols plays Southeastern Louisiana. The winner of both of those games will face each other in the conference championship in Frisco, Texas. We'll move on to the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt East and the Sun Belt West are already clinched. Coastal will be taking on North Texas in that conference championship game. And the WAC has a clinch with Nevada. The Mountain Division, however, is still open. If New Mexico State falls to UTEP and Idaho wins against rival Cullen Payton, that means the Vandals go to the conference championship game and will play Nevada. New Mexico State gets in with a win. We will move on now from that championship needs, which we mentioned, and we'll take another step here to the Bowl Bound. We have a couple teams who made it this week: Bowling Green, Columbia, Georgia State, Houston Baptist, James Madison, Louisville, Missouri State, San Jose State, Southeast Louisiana, South Dakota State, Tulane, USC, Utah, UTSA, and Western Carolina are in. A special mention goes to James Madison, making their first ever bowl bid this year. Danny, any big takeaways from the new class this week?
Yeah, that some of these teams that it's just surprising to see them finally make it. Louisville, Utah, UTSA, South Dakota State. We thought those teams would be really big competitors, and here they are, just barely making the bowl games. And it's a huge congratulations to James Madison for making it to a bowl game.
Big Bear?
First time ever.
Big Bear? I don't think he hears us. Well, let's take a move on here to some teams knocking outside. These are These teams are in must-win scenarios. Air Force Air Force plays Utah State, UAB, Buffalo, BYU in the Holy War. The Citadel can get in with a win over Furman. Fresno State against San Jose State. Illinois State against Indiana State. Louisiana Tech against Arkansas State. Lamar plays McNeese to try and get in. Marshall has Ohio. Minnesota plays Wisconsin. Wisconsin plays Minnesota. Both teams are playing for a bowl berth. Middle Tennessee has Western Kentucky. Navy takes on Maryland. Pacific has Hawaii at home. Pitt takes on West Virginia. Rice plays Houston. Richmond takes on William & Mary. SMU is playing North Texas. Texas A&M playing Texas in the Lone Star rivalry. UNLV has Nevada on the schedule. Utah State has Air Force. Both the Aggies and the Falcons, much like the Badgers and Gophers, are playing for a spot. UTEP can clinch with a win over New Mexico State. And that wraps up the class. Danny, who do you think has the easiest and hardest routes here?
For the easiest game, it would definitely have to be. I would say it would be BYU. UAB, who is playing against East Carolina, which should be an easy match. Maybe Buffalo at Youngstown is another easy matchup. And for hardest, I would think Richmond would have a tough time against William and Mary. These guys, William and Mary, they clinch their division. They are a big surprise team. And for Richmond, they're traveling to William and Mary's territory. So it's going to be a tough game for them.
Pigbear, what are your easiest and toughest games here? If they're not here, I'll do it myself. My toughest game is Wisconsin. I think they might have some difficulty at Minnesota. That's going to be a very hostile environment. As for my easiest game, I think I agree with you on UAB heading to East Carolina. Let's take a move on here. Let's head to a spotlight. We're going to shine on a lesser known format for football. The 2K universe is, of course, a multi-sport branching thing, and we're going over many different branches of football. We'll be showcasing 3 different tournaments over the next few weeks. We'll start with the Division III Football Championship, which has a very interesting format for this year as compared to the other disciplines. And the Division III is separated into 6 subdivisions called regions, each with 4 conferences in it. The conference champions auto-qualify for the tournament. The top 6 teams that are non-AQs get into the bracket. The number 1 and number 2 seeds in each bracket get a bye. The final 6 teams, when it's all said and done, since there are 6 brackets, are reseeded and play their games at neutral sites. This year's the Salem Football Stadium at Salem, Virginia. And the top 2 teams go to the championship game known as the Stag Bowl. We're gonna show you each of the 6 regions, and take you on a walk through who they'll be playing. We're gonna be starting with Region 1, which is set mainly in the Northeast. The first game between the 8 and 9 is between the Tufts Jumbos and the Norwich Generals. The winner of those games take on the number 2 team in D3 and the reigning D3 national champions, the Sal Regina Seahawks. The 4-5 is Fitchburg State Falcons taking on the number 24 WPI Engineers. Here's the 3-6 sees the Maritime College Privateers taking on the Husson Eagles. Then we have our second leading into a top seed, the Maine Maritime Mariners taking on the Endicott Gulls in Beverly, Massachusetts. The winner takes on the number 9 Williams Fs in Williamstown, Massachusetts. Move on to Region 2, mainly centered in the Middle Atlantic. The first game, the TCNJ Lions, which stands for the College of New Jersey, taking on the Thiel, Pennsylvania Tomcats in Greenville. The The winner takes on the number 1 team in the country, the Alvernia Golden Wolves in Reading, Pennsylvania. We'll have matchups between the number 19 Susquehanna Riverhawks taking on the Rochester Yellow Jackets, the number 18 team in D3. The number 11 Salisbury Seagulls welcome the number 16 Westminster Titans to Salisbury and Seagull Stadium for their matchup. And the number 7 St. John Fisher Cardinals get the winner between the Delaware Valley Aggies and the Dickinson Red Devils. So we'll move on to Region 3 of 6. Methodist North Carolina taking on the Southwestern Pirates in Georgetown, Texas. The winner takes on the number 5 Trinity Tigers in San Antonio. Randolph-Macon Yellow Jackets take on the Wesley Wolverines at Jerry Apple in Dover. The LaGrange Panthers take on the Austin Kangaroos in Sherman. And the last team, the number 2 Mary Hardin Baylor Crusaders. The Crew get the winner between the Texas Lutheran Bulldogs and the Center Colonels in Danville, Kentucky. Move on to Region 4. This one situated in the Midwest. The Albion Britons take on the Wittenberg Tigers in Springfield, Ohio. The winner gets the number 3 Hope Flying Dutchmen in Holland, Michigan. The Otterbein Cardinals take on the Oberlin Yowmen. The Bluffton Beavers take on the Anderson Ravens in Anderson, Indiana. Manchester Spartans take on the Kalamazoo Hornets in Kalamazoo. And the winner gets the number 12 Baldwin Wallace Yellow Jackets in Berea, Ohio. Move on to Region 5. This one situated further Midwest, I would say, towards the Great Plains. The Luther Norse take on the North Park Vikings in Chicago. The winner gets the Dubuque Spartans in Dubuque, Iowa, the number 6 team in the country. The Illinois College Blue Boys, probably my favorite nickname going through these that I found. They get to take on the St. Norbert Green Knights, who are the number 25 team in the country in Des Peres, Wisconsin. The Eureka Red Devils take on the Elmhurst Blue Jays in Elmhurst, Illinois. And the Concordia Chicago Cougars play the Beloit Buccaneers in Beloit, Wisconsin. The winner gets the number 23 Wheaton Thunder. And we have our final region situated out west. The winner of the matchup between the George Fox Bruins and the Chapman Panthers take on the Wisconsin Whitewater Warhawks, the number 4 team in the country. A team that even if you're not that if you know enough about college football, you should be at least somewhat familiar with. The number 20 Lewis and Clark Pioneers take on the number 14 Wisconsin Stevens Pointers. Number 21 the Wisconsin Oshkosh Titans head on the road to Redlands to take on the Redlands Bulldogs. The Concordia Moorhead Cobbers, whose helmet is actually not on there, that is my mistake. They get to take on a fictional team. If you watch the Mr. Hurricane streams, you may know the Kalispell Warhawks. They are here in D3. And the winner of that game in Kalispell takes on the number 8 Augsburg Augies in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Don't forget to stay tuned. We'll have the D2 football tournament next week, and the week after that we'll be talking about the FCS tournament. We'll move on now to the top 25, something you've probably been waiting for. A lot of changes all around and about, especially with some big ranked matchups, and as big a week as we had. We'll start off with our top 5 in the country. Number 1 and number 2 remain unchanged, as Oklahoma State and Boise State are your top 2. Number 3 is now LSU, number 4 USC, and number 5 Illinois. Danny, your thoughts on the top 5?
Yeah, these 5 teams, they really deserve to be in there. Especially Boise State with that big win over TCU.
I don't
It's
understand.
hard to knock off any of these teams.
I'd understand anyone voting for them as number 1. Pigbear, if you're here, you want to give any thoughts on the top 5? Maybe message him, see if he's here. We'll move on to the next members of the top 10. Number 6 is now TCU. Falling slightly, but they're still a one-loss team whose loss was against one of the top 2 teams in the country. Number 7 is now UConn, bolstering their reputation with a big win over a ranked team. Number 8, Virginia Tech, slipping still. still trying to recover after their loss to Maryland a few weeks prior. Number 9 is now North Carolina. And number 10, wrapping up, is Georgia Tech. Danny?
Yeah, that for these teams are all in a pretty interesting spot. Especially how like a lot of these teams they might be playing their conference championship if you really think about it. I think maybe the biggest matchup here might be Virginia Tech, North Carolina. They're number 8, number 9, and let's hope they both will play against each other soon.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to the next members of the top 25. Number 11 now is Stanford. The Cardinal got the win over Washington State, and they now clinched their conference championship game against USC. Michigan, number 12. Whether they'll play in the conference championship is still up in the air. They have to wait for next week's result against both Ohio State and the result between Michigan State and Penn State. Number 13 is Oregon. They have a not that easy matchup against Oregon State. Number 14, New Mexico State. 10-1, they can wrap up their season as a one-loss team against UTEP next week. And number 15 is Baylor. They have a tough matchup against the TCU Horned Frogs. Danny?
Yeah, that for these teams that Baylor, they took a really tough loss, and you gotta really be thinking that if Michigan could get this win over Ohio State, they might jump Stanford and maybe even more if they definitely continue winning on their conference championship. And for Stanford, gotta really hope that they put on a big showing against both Cal and USC.
We'll move on. Number 16 is Temple. The Owls are looking to finish 10-2 with a win over rival Villanova. Number 17 is Stephen F. Austin. The undefeated Lumberjacks finished their season on the road in Houston against rival Sam Houston. Number 18, Northern Illinois. The Huskies hope to clinch their division, but they need everything to fall in their way. They play an Eastern Michigan team hungry to steal it from them. Number 19 is Memphis. Big win over ranked Southern Miss. They can clinch their division with a win and a Houston loss. And number 20, pardon me for the battery, I will plug that in. Number 20 is Colorado. The Buffaloes need things to fall in place for them, but they can still clinch their conference championship with a win and a Kansas loss. Danny?
Yeah, that for some of these teams, they are really in a good spot, especially Stephen F. Austin. They can finish undefeated, going to their conference championship, beating a really good Sam Houston State and beating whoever wins the other division.
Mm-hmm.
For Temple, they are a big surprise considering they went 5-7 or like 5-8, I believe, last year. So
yeah,
for them to be ranked and going into their conference championship, really good for them.
We'll move on now to our last 5. We had a couple teams drop out. Number 21 on our top 25 is Kansas. They were here last week. They lost to Missouri and ended up skidding just a little bit. Number 22 is now UCF. The Knights are ranked after their win over Rice, and they hope to finish 9-3 with another win over USF. Amazing how they went from 0-3 to 8-3 in an instant. Number 23 is Nevada. The Wolfpack clinched their division. They have one more game against UNLV to prove themselves, and hopefully for them, maybe even slip into a conference championship or a BCS Bowl. Number 24 is Washington, a very surprising team to see slip into rankings for the first time this year. The Huskies have performed extremely well this year, especially with that upset win earlier this year over Oregon. Number 25 is Idaho. It may not look it, but Idaho is performing incredibly well this year. Though they have been flying quite under the radar, they have received several votes to get them in the top 25. Danny?
Yeah, there are a lot of teams in this last 5 that are really surprising. I mean, UCF, especially how they started 0-3, Idaho, a team no one expected at all. Nevada, who's been coming in and out, and Washington getting their first appearance this year. Really good for all these teams.
Idaho, they have 2 losses on the year, both to ranked opponents. They lost to Boise State and New Mexico State. There are worse losses to have in the country, I'd say. We'll look at the teams who are just on the door. We had 5 teams drop out. Coastal Carolina's out, UMass is out, Georgia is out, Central Michigan is out, and Southern Miss is out once again. I expect to see Coastal Carolina back by next week. It might be a tougher sell for a UMass or a Georgia. Central Michigan could potentially be there, but they have to watch out because Eastern Michigan is getting votes as well, as is Tennessee and Sam Houston State. I would also throw some recognition to Michigan State and Oregon State, who can both finish with 9 wins on the season. And in the case of the Spartans, play in the Big Ten Championship if all their cards line up. Danny?
Yeah, there are a lot of teams who deserve votes, and who should be at least getting some recognition. A lot of teams dropped out. That's really surprising.
At the end of the day,
some teams dropped into this, especially Sam Houston State, where surprisingly they only have 1 loss. And that was a 3-point loss against Texas Arlington. So glad to see them now here, and now they have a big game against Stephen F. Austin.
At the end of the day, there are only 25 spots. That's a great tragedy. The top 25. We'll move on now to... I figured we'd drop the players of the week since we're not doing stats as much. We'll move on here to the games to watch for next week. We have Marshall and Ohio, which clinches their division. You have the Egg Bowl between Ole Miss and Mississippi State, FAU and FIU in the Don Shula Bowl. TCU and Baylor, a huge non-conference rivalry, especially for the Horned Frogs to try and slip into a BCS berth. UCF taking on USF. That decides the East. The war on I-4 has rarely ever meant as much as it has now. How Georgia and Georgia Tech, clean old-fashioned hate decides that division. Ohio State and Michigan, a huge game, even if it didn't have championship implications, but it does for the Wolverines. And it also does for the Spartans. Michigan State plays Penn State this week. They need a win and a Michigan loss in order to make it to the conference championship game. The conference championship game in the Legends spot. Alabama-Auburn, the Iron Bowl, will be a huge deciding factor in that conference. Sam Houston and Stephen F. Austin playing on a neutral site in Houston to decide not only the Southland West, but potentially an unbeaten season for the Lumberjacks. The Holy War is huge for BYU this year. They need the win to go bowling, especially after finishing last season ranked. USC and Notre Dame square off. Notre Dame is currently just needs to wait on other results in order to see if they're still in the conference race. USC has clinched it themselves. It'll definitely help Notre Dame to get the win, though. LSU and Tulane playing for the Tiger Rag, a lesser-known rivalry, but around here treated with respect. Oregon and Oregon State. This is interesting because these two teams are not too far apart in record. I don't know if you noticed that. But if Oregon State can manage to pull off a major upset, we might see them in the top 25. And of course, we wrap with Bedlam, Oklahoma State, heading on the road to take on the Oklahoma Sooners. Danny, your big game of the week here?
Yeah, there are a lot of big matchups, a lot of good games. I just noticed we didn't put down our 2KU for next week, so
we'll keep it.
Gotta see you for that one later.
We'll keep it a surprise. Your big game from the ones here.
The game I will definitely see is UCF USF because it's my school, got represented, and I really want to see TCU Baylor. That's also an extremely huge matchup.
Mm-hmm. My big game this week is probably going to be the game between Oregon and Oregon State. The rivalry formerly known as the Civil War, or not only do they play for a platypus trophy, this game could decide. This game, up until recently, could have had championship implications. That would have been crazy. Oregon State in the Pac-10 championship game. Imagine. But we're not going to any of these games. We have a game that might be a little lower on the radar. However, I'm thinking that it's going to have a huge implication on the season later this year, and that's the game between Northern Illinois, the number 18 team in the country, and Eastern Michigan. The Eastern Michigan Eagles are playing their final game of the year at Ryerson Stadium at home against Northern Illinois. They're 9-2 right now. The Huskies are, I believe, 9-1. I believe they're 10-1.
Yep.
The Huskies
10-1.
The Huskies need a win to remain in competition for the division. They need a win and a Central Michigan loss. Eastern Michigan wins, they're in. And 3 teams are still in the race for the MAC West. And the winner of all these 3 is surely going to end up ranked, while the other 2 are on the outside looking in. And I'm sure Vegas would favor the Huskies. I'm picking the Eagles, though, to get the big upset win at home. Danny?
Yeah, this is a really big game, but I do think I have to agree with you. Eastern Michigan, they got a lot of momentum by them. They're senior night at home. They are playing with a lot of passion, so give me the Eastern Michigan Eagles, I think.
It is the Eagles. We're going to thank you all for watching. Huge thanks to Pigbear for joining us. I believe he's not here at the moment. Thanks for Danny, of course. And we'll see you not only next week, but also later this week whenever we can schedule the basketball stream. Thank you all for your patience, and thank you all for watching. We will see you next week.